Hello, Year 11, and this is the next topic that we're going to be revising in terms of Elizabeth. So we're going to be looking at the Catholic threat. Now, the first thing you need to do is your low stakes quiz. This is just your short quiz on what you learned in your last lesson. So when I tell you to, you're going to pause the video, click the link in the video description to bring up your quiz, complete your quiz, and then submit and check your answers. So if you can pause your video now. And today we are going to be looking at this whole spec point on the Catholic threat. So just like we were doing when we were in school in P6s, when we were covering like one spec point per P6, your Elizabeth revision lesson in this 2-week block is going to cover the Catholic threat, the whole thing. This is the knowledge organizer that you have been using, which will be attached to this lesson, but there is also these are updated knowledge organisers which we've been using in the P6, which are simpler. They have less on them, and so we will be using these as well. Now, today our title is How Serious Was the Catholic Threat to Elizabeth? So if you want to pause your video to write your title. Okay, welcome back. The first thing we're going to be looking at is early toleration. Now, when Elizabeth first became queen in 1558, she tolerated the Catholics for quite a long time. So that means she kind of put up with them. She didn't force them to do too much. And so from 1558 to 1568, we can see that she clearly followed a policy of toleration. And she did this for a few reasons. She didn't want to provoke a Catholic rebellion. So under her father, Henry VIII, and also under her brother, Edward, there had been Catholic rebellions because English people, most of whom were Catholic, did not like the changes to their religion and the country becoming more Protestant. So Elizabeth decided to make sure that the English people did not rebel against her. She wasn't going to force them to be too Protestant. She was also worried about invasion from abroad. So she was worried that powerful Catholic countries, such as Spain, might invade England, or they might be more likely to invade England if they followed a strict policy of punishing Catholics. And so we can see in her actions toleration, examples of toleration. So, for example, in Elizabethan England, recusancy was a crime. Recusancy, this word here, we did it last year, is not going to church. In Elizabeth's reign, the churches were all technically Protestant, so Catholics, many Catholics, didn't want to go to church. They would rather hold a private ceremony at home because they didn't want to go to a Protestant church. Now, the fine for recusancy was 12 shillings. It wasn't a huge amount, so nobility, gentry, business people could all afford this fine if they didn't want to go to church. But to be honest, it wasn't enforced. So although the fine existed, no one was made to pay it, and therefore people who didn't want to go to church, recusants, could carry on not going. Additionally, Elizabeth's first choice for her first archbishop was Matthew Parker. He had been her tutor when she was growing up, and he was a moderate Protestant who was kind of acceptable to Catholics because he wasn't too extreme. Now, if we think about it the other way around, Catholics also tolerated Elizabeth. So Philip of Spain at this point in time was more interested in trading with England than invading England. And English Catholics followed a policy of outward conformity. So the way they behaved and the things they said in public made it appear like they were Protestant and they were following Elizabeth's religious changes. However, in their minds and in their homes, they carried on with the Catholic beliefs. So this is a policy called outward conformity. You're doing the right thing, so that's what everyone can see, even though inside and in private you aren't following the rules. Now, what we're going to do is some true or false questions. In your books, if you can just write T or F instead of true or false, but if you think it's false, please write down the correct answer. Question 1, Elizabeth punished Catholics harshly from the start of her reign. Give it a think. Write your answer in your book. We can see that this is false. At first, until 1568, we can see that she tolerated them. Question 2, Elizabeth tolerated Catholics because she wanted to avoid provoking a Protestant rebellion, and she was worried about an invasion from Germany. Give it a think. Write down your answer. This one's false. She wanted to avoid a Catholic rebellion, not a Protestant rebellion, and she was worried about a Spanish invasion, not a German. Question 3. At first, the 12-shilling fine for recusancy, not going to church, was not enforced. True or false? Write down your answer. This one is true. Question 4. Elizabeth's first Archbishop, Matthew Parker, was a strict Puritan. Give it a think. Write down your answer. This one is false. He was a moderate Protestant. Question 5. At first, Philip of Spain was more interested in trading with England than invading England. True or false? Give it a think. Write down your answer. This one is true. And question 6. At first, English Catholics openly opposed the religious settlement. Let's give it a think. Let's write down our answer. This one is false. At first, English Catholics mainly followed a policy of outward conformity, just being a Catholic inside their homes and inside their minds, but doing as they were told. Okay, what I'd like you to do now is complete these 2 fragments. So turn both of these fragments, worried about the 2 threats of a Catholic, and follow a policy of outward. I want you to turn them both into sentences. It might be, the words might come at the beginning, the middle, or in the end, but you need to keep them in this order. If you can pause your video now. Okay, welcome back. Fragment 1, I've written, in the early years of her reign, Elizabeth tolerated Catholics because she was worried about the 2 threats of a Catholic rebellion or a Catholic invasion. You've probably got something very similar because we only did 2 threats. And fragment 2, I've put, at first Catholics were able to follow a policy of outward conformity while at home and in their minds remaining Catholic. And you've probably got something very similar as well. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, Mary, Queen of Scots was a Catholic. Really important here. She was a Catholic. She loved the Pope. She also, because she was related to Elizabeth, she was Elizabeth's cousin, she had a legitimate claim to the throne, unlike Elizabeth. So Elizabeth's claim to the throne was dubious. Some people didn't think it was legitimate because her father, Henry VIII, had divorced Catherine of Aragon before marrying Elizabeth's mother, Anne Boleyn. Catholics didn't think you could do divorce, so they thought Elizabeth wasn't born inside marriage, therefore she wasn't legitimate. Mary, Queen of Scots, had no problems with her parents and their marriages, so she definitely had a legitimate claim to the throne. And so for many Catholics, Mary, Queen of Scots, was someone who they thought should be Queen of England instead of Elizabeth. Additionally, Mary, Queen of Scots, was already one step ahead of Elizabeth in that she had an heir. She had a son called James, and this meant that Catholics who wanted Mary, Queen of Scots, to be the Queen of England also knew that if Mary became the Queen of England and then later died, there was already a son lined up, ready and waiting to become the king. Elizabeth never had any children. She never had any direct heirs. So this was another bonus for Mary, Queen of Scots. So, true or false questions. Mary, Queen of Scots, was a Protestant. Is this true or false? This is false. She was a Catholic. Mary, Queen of Scots, was related to Elizabeth but had a legitimate claim to the English throne. True or false? Write down your answer. This one is true. Mary, Queen of Scots, was rejected by English Catholics. Is this true or false? Write down your answer. This one is false. She was a figurehead to rebellions and to plots. Many English Catholics wanted her to be the Queen of England. True or false? Mary, Queen of Scots, already had a son and heir. This one is true. He was called James. Mary, Queen of Scots, was close to Germany. True or false? This is false. She was linked to France. She'd been married to the French king before he died, and also Spain because she was a Catholic. Okay, so what I would like you to do in your books, I'd like you to turn these fragments into sentences for me. Fragment 1, Scots was a figurehead for plots. And fragment 2, links to other powerful Catholic. If you can pause your video now to turn these 2 fragments into complete sentences for me. Okay, so I've written, Mary, Queen of Scots, was a figurehead for plots and rebellions as she was Catholic and had a legitimate claim to the English throne. That's why they wanted her. And fragment 2, I've written, Mary, Queen of Scots was a large threat because she had links to other powerful Catholic countries like France and Spain. Well done if you've got 2 good answers like these ones. And the next thing we're going to do, we're going to look at the rebellion of the Northern Earls. And if we have a look here, we can see that this rebellion of the Northern Earls happened in 1569. So it's in the period where Elizabeth began to tolerate Catholics less. And it's one of the reasons she tolerated Catholics less. So, the Earls of Westmoreland and Northumberland, that's these 2 counties up here in the north of England, which we know is traditionally a very strongly Catholic area. They were both Catholic themselves. Now, the 2 Earls, they didn't like Elizabeth. They wanted to get rid of her, and they thought they could get rid of Elizabeth and they could get Mary, Queen of Scots, who by 1569 was living in England because she had been kicked out of Scotland, to marry the Duke of Norfolk, who was an English noble, and then Mary could become the Queen of England. Now, they thought that they were going to be backed up by Philip in this plan to get rid of Elizabeth, put Mary on the throne and get Mary married to Norfolk. They thought they were going to have the backing of Philip of Spain, a powerful Catholic country. Now, when the rebellion began, they were able to get about 4,600 supporters, Catholic supporters from the north of England, who rebelled with them. However, Elizabeth made sure that Mary, Queen of Scots, was speedily taken away to another part of England so that there was no chance that Westmoreland and Northumberland could get hold of her. Now, Elizabeth was able to raise an army of about 8,000 men, led by the Duke of Sussex. This wasn't great for the Earls of Westmoreland and Northumberland, and the rebellion basically kind of melted away and disappeared. Now, the 2 Earls themselves, they knew they were at risk. So they fled to Scotland to stay out of England so that Elizabeth couldn't get hold of them and execute them. Philip of Spain, his support never showed up. And so Elizabeth, with the 4,600 rebels who she wanted to teach a lesson, she executed 800 rebels, which was actually a very large number of rebels to be executed following a rebellion. And she did this because she wanted to show people that going against her and trying to get rid of her really did not pay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to answer some true or false questions. Remember, T or F in your book, and if it's false, I want you to write down the truth. Question 1. The rebellion of the Northern Earls happened in 1569. Think about it, write your answer. This one's true. The Earl of Westmoreland and the Earl of Northumberland were both Catholic. True or false? Write down your answer. This one is true. They planned to force Elizabeth to convert to Catholicism. True or false? Write down your answer. This is false. They planned to remove Elizabeth and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. Question 4. Philip of Spain had promised to support them. This is true. The Earls only managed to rally, that means to get 800 supporters. True or false? This is false. They actually had 4,600 supporters. And question 6. Eventually they were defeated with no support from Spain, and Elizabeth executed 800 rebels. Is this true or false? Write down your answer. This one is true. Okay, so what we are going to do now is we're going to turn some fragments into sentences. So our fragments are aims of the rebellion, failed as. Okay, so if you can pause your video to turn these 2 fragments into sentences about the rebellion of the Northern Earls. Okay, welcome back. So I've written, the aims of the rebellion of the Northern Earls were to remove Elizabeth, replacing her with Mary, Queen of Scots, who was to be married to the English Duke of Norfolk. Okay, you might have just put the aims were to remove Elizabeth and replace her with Mary. It's even better if you can tell me that they also wanted to give Mary extra legitimacy by marrying her to the Duke of Norfolk. Failed as. I wrote, the rebellion failed as the Earls failed to get enough local support or to get hold of Mary, and additionally Philip of Spain did not send any help. You might have put in your failed as, you might have also talked about the number of soldiers that Elizabeth had led by Sussex, or you might have put the fact that the Earls just kind of stopped once they found out how many people they were going to be facing, and then fled to Scotland. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is the Papal Bull. Now, the Papal Bull, which is just kind of like a statement from the Pope, it was issued in 1570, kind of in response to the rebellion of the Northern Earls. So it was issued by the Pope, and it basically said a few things. Number one, it said that all Catholics in England or abroad had a duty to rebel against Elizabeth. If a Catholic was in England and they weren't rebelling against Elizabeth, they'd be going to hell. It also said that Elizabeth and everyone living in England would be going to hell if they were Protestant. Okay, but Catholics had to begin rebelling against Elizabeth. And this kind of showed that Philip and other Catholic rulers, but Philip liked to think he was the big one, Philip then had a duty to invade England and try and remove Elizabeth, or at least to support Catholic rebellions in England. And one impact of the Papal Bull was that recusancy, the number of Catholics not going to church, increased because even if they didn't want to rebel directly, it's kind of a rebellion, a small rebellion, a personal rebellion against Elizabeth to refuse to go to her Protestant churches. And the impact of this was that Elizabeth's toleration to Catholics stopped. She had to stop it when she knew she was facing a rebellion, when she knew that Philip had been told he had to invade England, and when you had all the different Catholics in England not going to church. And one example of her toleration stopping is that the recusancy fine was increased from 12 shillings, an affordable amount, to £20, which was a huge sum at this point in time, which meant that in reality it wasn't affordable for most people at all. Even nobles would have to think about whether it was worth it because it was per time, and so therefore they needed £20 per time was expensive. Another example of the impact of the Papal Bull is that Jesuits were Catholics who travelled to England with the aim of destroying Protestantism. Some of the Jesuits were English who had gone abroad, been trained and then come back. Jesuits began to come to England to try and destroy Protestantism and make it Catholic again. And one of the key men in this was a man called Edward Campion. He travelled to England, he began preaching Catholicism, he began trying to reconvert people back to Catholicism. Unfortunately for him, he was captured, tortured, hung, drawn and quartered, and then that was his execution. So Elizabeth began to treat Catholics much more harshly. So rather than tolerating them at all, she made it incredibly difficult for them to not go to church, and she also was open about the fact that she tortured Jesuits. So what we are going to do, we're going to answer these questions in our books. True or false? Remember, if it's false, please write the truth. The Papal Bull was sent in 1580. Give it a think. True or false? This is false. It was issued in 1570. The bull told all Catholics that they must disobey Elizabeth. True or false? Give it a think. This is true, it did. The bull's instructions stated that Catholic rulers should leave Elizabeth alone. True or false? Give it a think. This is false. It stated that they had permission to invade, and even that they should invade England, not just that they could, they should be doing it. Question 4. The bull led to more English Catholics becoming recusants. True or false? This one's true. Elizabeth continued to tolerate Catholics because she didn't want to annoy them. Is this true or false? Give it a think. This one is false. An example of how she stopped tolerating them is that she increased recusancy fines to £20, which is unaffordable to virtually all of the English. And the Jesuits were Catholics, Catholic missionaries whose aim was to destroy Protestantism. Is this true or false? This one's true. And finally, Edward Campion was a Jesuit who outwitted Elizabeth's spies and escaped. True or false? Give it a think. This is false. He was captured, he was tortured, and he was hung, drawn, and quartered. Well done if you got all of those correct. What we're going to do now is some fragments. You've got 3 this time. Okay, so fragment 1, duty to disobey. Fragment 2, policy of toleration. And fragment 3, destroy Protestantism and travelled. Okay, so pause your video, turn these 3 fragments into 3 different sentences about the papal bull and the changes to the policy of toleration. Okay, welcome back. Fragment 1, I've written, the papal bull gave Catholics everywhere a duty to disobey Elizabeth, and this included the King of Spain. Policy of toleration. I've written, the papal bull meant that Elizabeth had to give up her policy of toleration and become increasingly harsh on Catholics. And fragment 3. The Jesuits wanted to destroy Protestantism and travelled to England to try and convert the English back to Catholicism. You could have put there some detail about Edward Campion and what he was trying to do and about his capture. Okay, well done if you've written 3 good sentences with like specific details. The next thing we're going to look at is we're going to look at a big shift. So 1570, the papal bull, and we can see really quite immediately that this began to have an effect on Catholics both in England and abroad. So we have 1571, the Ridolfi plot. Remember, we do 3 plots: Ridolfi, Throckmorton, Babington, in that order. 1571, the Ridolfi plot. Now, Ridolfi was a rich Italian banker. He was a banker to the Pope. And the Ridolfi plot was led by Ridolfi and Philip of Spain. It was their plan. The plan was to assassinate Elizabeth, invade England, marry Mary, Queen of Scots, to the Duke of Norfolk. I feel like we've heard this before. And then make Mary the Catholic Queen. It's a very similar plan to what the Northern Earls hoped would happen. They wanted to get rid of Elizabeth. They wanted Philip to come and help them. They were going to marry Mary to Norfolk, and they were going to make Mary the Queen. Okay, so it's not new thinking, but Philip was actually involved in this. Now, the plot was discovered by Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, whose job it was to discover plots. Some of the people involved were tortured. Mary was locked up. So previously she'd been living kind of freely, in inverted commas. Elizabeth moved her and made it so that she was really contained. She was in a prison, but it was a prison fit for a queen. And Ridolfi kind of scarpered, he fled. Now, if we go forward 10 years, and then we had another plot against Elizabeth. Now, in this plot, which kind of had some backing from Philip of Spain, the Pope, but also France, the aim was that French soldiers would come to England and they would free Mary from prison. Elizabeth, we've heard this before, would be captured and killed, and Mary would be made the Queen. Now, Throckmorton was Mary's kind of one of her jailers, people in charge of her in jail, and he communicated with her, and he also communicated with Philip of Spain. He was like the go-between. Walsingham discovered this. Throckmorton was locked up. He was executed. They used torture to find these things out. Now, the Throckmorton plot led to, because of the fact that letters and communication went from Mary to Throckmorton and from Throckmorton to Philip, Walsingham decided that all of Mary's post was going to be read so that they could keep Elizabeth safe. So we're going to do some true or false questions. If you just write T or F in your book, if it's false, write down the correct answer. The order of the plot is Babington, Ridolfi, Throckmorton. Give it a think, write down your answer. This one's false. It is Ridolfi, Throckmorton, Babington. The Ridolfi plot was led by Ridolfi and Philip of Spain. True or false? Write down your answer. This one's true. The Ridolfi plot aims to assassinate Elizabeth, marry Mary to Norfolk, and make Mary Queen. This one is true. It was defeated as Walsingham discovered it, and Norfolk was executed. This is true. Norfolk had, by this point in time, been involved in one rebellion and one plot, both of which intended to get rid of Elizabeth and marry Mary to him, so Elizabeth thought it was best just to execute Norfolk. Question 5. The Throckmorton plot was led by French soldiers. This one is true. Remember, they kind of had the backing of Philip and the Pope. It aimed to free Mary, kill Elizabeth, and make James the king. This one is false. It was going to make Mary the queen. James was Mary's son. Throckmorton was captured, revealed the plot to Walsingham, and this led to Mary having her mail checked, her post. This one is true. Well done if you got all of those correct. We're now going to look at the Babington plot, the final plot we're going to look at. This happened in 1586, so our plots are 1571, 1582, 1586. Babington, 1586. This involved both Walsingham and Cecil, who were paying close attention to Mary, who was locked up. Babington was Mary's jailer. Now, Babington had been in discussions with Philip of Spain, and they made the plan to, unsurprisingly, assassinate Elizabeth, and this time use Spanish forces to invade England, free Mary, and make her queen. Now, Mary communicated with the plotters via letters which were smuggled in barrels, and these letters were also written in code to make it even harder for the plot to be discovered, but Walsingham and Cecil cracked the code. Now, in the letters, there was clear proof that Babington was asking Mary what he should do. So he said something along the lines of, "I've got 6 men ready to kill Elizabeth. What shall I do?" And Mary said, "Set the 6 men to work." And this was proof that Mary was involved in the plot, something that had been lacking before, direct proof linking Mary to an attempt to kill the Queen. Babington had his head chopped off, and Mary, Queen of Scots, she was in prison, but kind of 3 plots, and this plot, actually, she said she wanted to kill Elizabeth. This was too far. Cecil and Walsingham, Elizabeth didn't openly want to execute Mary, but Cecil and Walsingham worked on Elizabeth. They kind of manipulated and persuaded her that Mary, Queen of Scots, had to go. And so Mary, Queen of Scots, was executed. So we're going to do some true or false questions. Question 1. The Babington plot was led by Francis of France and Babington. This one false. It's Philip and Babington. Question 2. It aimed to kill Elizabeth and make Mary queen. This one's true. Question 3. It was intercepted by Norfolk, who intercepted letters where Mary ordered Elizabeth's execution. This is false. Norfolk, remember, had been executed. It was intercepted by Walsingham. Elizabeth responded by immediately executing Babington and Mary. This is false. She executed Babington immediately, but had to be convinced, manipulated by Walsingham and Cecil before she would execute Mary, Queen of Scots. Okay, so what we are going to do, we're going to turn these fragments into full sentences. These fragments relate to the Ridolfi, the Throckmorton, and the Babington plot. So, fragment 1 was a figurehead to multiple plots such as, each plot aimed to and agreed to execute Mary. Pause your video, write your 3 sentences. Okay, welcome back. I've written, Mary was a figurehead to multiple plots such as the Ridolfi, Throckmorton, and Babington plots. Now, if I wanted to make this even better, I would have put the years. I would have said the Ridolfi plot, 1571, Throckmorton, 1582, and Babington, 1586. But so long as you've got your 3 plots in order, it's good. Each plot aimed to. We could have put, there are similarities between the plots. Each plot aimed to kill Elizabeth, replace her with Mary. However, they varied in terms of who planned and who led them. Because if we think about it, the plots were all incredibly similar, but they had subtle differences in terms of who backed them. Was it Philip? Was it Philip and the Pope? Was it Philip the Pope and France? And who was going to do the invading? Was it France? Was it Spain? In fact, our final one, agreed to execute Mary. I've written, Elizabeth agreed to execute Mary following the Babington plot, where Walsingham gained proof that Mary herself was part of the planning and had ordered Elizabeth to be assassinated. So you could have just put Elizabeth agreed to execute Mary following the Babington plot, full stop, but it's even better if you can tell me kind of what about the Babington plot meant that Elizabeth was able to agree to Mary's execution. So our final thing today is your exit ticket, your short quiz to check what you've understood from today's lesson. So when I tell you to, you're going to pause the video, click the link in the video description to bring up your quiz, complete your quiz, and then submit and check your answers. Well done for your work today. You should be really pleased with yourself, and if you can pause your video now.